All right. Hi, and welcome to From Many People's Strength, the podcast where we cover Saskatchewan, current events, and politics. And my name is Cory, and my pronouns are he and him.
And my name is David. My pronouns are they and them. And I'm okay with he and him as well.
And we've been on a bit of a break. We did come back for a quick show.
Yes, and then I was gone again. So that was...
Yeah, no, it's good though. It's good to have a break when you need it. Like, it can be a lot to be absorbing news all the time.
I would like to say I didn't absorb news while I wasn't doing the podcast, but sadly that was not
you were still
the case,
in there all the time, eh? Yeah.
Yeah.
We got a comment on Reddit on the previous episode talking about how we should change our whole show. We need to take a historical approach, and we need to do more educational stuff and be more, more generous to the conservative perspectives. And like, we need to do a whole other show, not this show. So
that sounds like a lovely show for someone to do. If there's one of our listeners who wants to do that, they should. They should, in fact. I don't listen to podcasts, so I wouldn't listen to it.
I also would not listen to that show, but if they choose to do that show, that is totally their call.
Like that exists already, though. It's not like that doesn't happen. Like, anyone who wants, it's not a podcast, but like, people can listen to John Gormley and every single other news talk commentary, hours upon hours a day, every day on that station, right? Yep. Like that's
it's every
there. Like, the actual similar to Fox, right? The actual news is usually relatively good, and everything that's commentary has a Fox News like slant to it. So if you want that, you have a radio station. You can listen to that 21 hours a day. We don't need to fill that niche. That niche is there. Don't get me wrong. There's like, what we do is there's more people doing it too. I know when you and I first started this, it was because there's like, hey, there's nothing really talking about the news in Saskatchewan from a more leftist perspective. There's kind of a niche that's being missed, and that niche has been filled by a lot of people, which is great. I still like getting together with you every couple of weeks and chatting, and if we can film it and let other people watch it, that's cool too. But I will say, if the person who wants that show to exist would like to pay us to do that show,
hey, that's a great idea.
There is probably a price in which I could be employed. I don't know what it would be, because I would probably have to quit my own job because of like all sorts of rules and whatnot if I'm getting paid to do something like this outside of work. Make an offer. We'll see if it's worth.
We'll see where we're at
making that show for you. If you are a producer of some kind, I'm willing to be hired. I'll sell my soul.
Paging, who's in charge of CJME right now? Yeah. No, actually, I don't think I could make that show. It would be antithetical to my very personality. So, I guess.
Try.
I could give it a shot. I'd get fired pretty fast, though, I think.
Yeah.
That's so I guess
it's not like we don't from time to time try and get underneath where the right is coming from. I think I know for me at least, when I try and make criticisms, I try and do it within the framework of where a more conservative person might come from. I obviously don't have those same viewpoints, but if I'm going to criticize Mo or Polyev or Kenny or someone like that as to why they are problematic even as a conservative leader, there's not a lot of value in coming in and saying, well, they're a conservative. That doesn't that's not really going to get much traction, and that's we know that's where they're coming from.
Yeah, and
But
we
the
can on
criticisms that
occasion.
yeah.
Yeah, we can on occasion point out the problems with the conservative viewpoint.
Yep.
But yeah, if we're gonna criticize individual people, like we actually have to be critical in a way that conservatives will listen to.
Yeah. And like I said, it's almost a like you and I joke about it now, where I even talk frequently about if you want to have the whole let's run government like a business, if you want to do, approach this from
Yeah.
how can we be cost effective, let's even take the ethical viewpoint off the table, because I know my ethics are going to be different from a lot of people, but even just take ethics out of the picture, let's look at raw dollars and cents.
Yeah.
That's like, that should be a conservative viewpoint, shouldn't it? Like, isn't being good with money, being good for the economy, paying attention to the deficit, things like that? I thought that was the thing they claim as a conservative value, and I talk about that a lot, probably too much at times on this podcast. So, yeah. Anyways, I'm glad people are engaging. I'm glad they're giving comments.
Yeah.
But
we also got a great comment on Facebook thanking us for coming back and happy that we were producing again. So then we took another break, but we're back again.
I appreciate that people listen. I'm always a little bit blown away that they are. It's kind of cool. But.
And it is more all the time. So welcome if you're a new listener. Yeah, it's good though. And now I guess
tackle the elephant in the room.
Yeah, let's talk about. I guess I won't bring up the story, but obviously this past week there was multiple stabbings by Miles Sanderson on the in multiple places, I think, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. So Miles Sanderson killed 10 people and injured 19, I believe it was. And I don't really have a whole lot that I can say about the actual incidents, except that it's obviously very tragic, and I feel terrible for the victims and their families and their community. I recently was listening to something, and they were talking about how the community has also had not just had to deal with these stabbings and the tragedy, but also had to be harassed by media from outside of Saskatchewan that was coming in and just to bang out a headline, and they were kind of being bothersome and harassing the people in the community. So there actually was a point where the reserve banned media from within the reserve for the well-being of the community. So I feel for them. I obviously, like, that makes perfect sense to me. Like, you don't want a bunch of people coming in and asking questions when you're going through something traumatic. The article that we actually do have in the show notes is talking about the discussion around the parole and the release of Miles Sanderson, and it's a tough call. I know I've heard a lot lately the line hard cases make bad law, and this is a case where if you make a judgment, a blanket kind of law on this case, then that is not accurate to the majority of cases. This is kind of a one-off. This is an individual who was particularly troubled and dealing with a particular mental state and way of dealing with society. You can't apply that same logic to everybody and say, well, we have to have stricter parole release rules. I've also seen a number of people who kind of use cases like this to kind of believe that this undermines the police abolition movement, and I don't think that's right either. I think that cases like this, they make you want to protect people, and they make you want to keep everyone safe, but that doesn't mean that we're doing things the right way now. Often I find and believe that the way that we're currently doing things often is what leads to making people more brutal and more damaged, and then things like this happen.
It's one of the recurring things we've talked about since we've started doing this show is how humans as a whole are really bad at evaluating risk. And very specifically, we are bad at overplaying acute risk and downplaying chronic risk. And so anytime there is an acute event, and this is about as acute as you can get, it shifts a perspective in a way that's probably not very accurate.
Right.
And when you talk about, police abolition, like this is one of those circumstances, and no one can can second guess. But if someone wants to step in and second guess the release of the parole, I would argue then we also need to second guess the incarceration in the first place. Then we need to second guess the system that prioritizes punishment over healing. Like I would have rather the violence done by Sanderson just not have been done in the first place, rather than worrying about, are we punishing it sufficiently
enough? Yeah.
I at the end of the day, what are we doing to make sure that violence just doesn't happen?
Right.
How are we preventing it? And studies have shown, time and time again, that putting people in jail makes them more violent, and that literally there would be less crime if you just ignored crime. Like literally, if you just didn't put people in jail at all when they commit crime, it actually reduces crime, because jails increase crime just by virtue of people being in them. And unless you want to start going down the road of like science fiction dystopia, where you're like, okay, the first time anyone does anything wrong, they're in jail for life.
Right.
You're gonna, you're going to have a carceral justice system that increases crime in society as a whole. But again, this case isn't the case to be talking about it. I guess now that I have, I don't want to be a hypocrite either on it, but I think you're right. Hard cases make bad laws. I think when we take a step back, there are lots and lots of other data points that can accurately make the argument. And I don't think this one undoes that argument, despite some people using it that way.
It's unfortunate that when one tries to make points like that, to say like, okay, this is not the case to make a new law or make things harsher or talk about stricter punishments or guidelines, that people will think that you don't care or that you're being an apologist for the person who was causing harm. Like in this case, like we're not apologizing. We're not making excuses for Miles Sanderson. He did what he did, and it's awful, and he shouldn't have done it. But we have to look for root causes, right? Like we have to actually think about what happened that led up to this. It didn't come out of nowhere. Like these things aren't in a vacuum where they just happen. So we have to try to understand what happened and how we can actually get to the root cause and prevent it from happening in the first place. Mm-hmm. So again, I don't know. I feel awful for the community and the families, and I just don't know. With the way the system is currently, I don't know how to prevent this sort of thing from happening entirely.
I don't think, with the current system, you can't.
Yeah, that's right.
Like that's the end of it. And I don't know what much, like there probably isn't that much more to say, so we can sort of move on to another topic. I think it would have been a pretty glaring omission had we not talked about it at all.
Right.
But at the end of the day, I think where you and I have tended to talk about things has been less about just saying what happened in the news and more about policies and outcomes. I think we're going to see some policies and outcomes come from this over time. And I'm worried about what those could look like. But I think we need to talk about those, 2 weeks, 4 weeks from now, 6 months, 2 years from now. And I think
they start being proposed.
Yeah, I think that's where sort of you and I can have maybe a little bit more discussion around the event than just today.
Yep, for sure. Conservative members pick MP Pierre Poilievre to be their new leader, with a 68.15% of the points on the first ballot for a decisive win. So that this is who leads the Conservative Party of Canada now. And there's a lot of hot takes going on. People thinking that this means that the Conservative Party is irrelevant now. People thinking that this makes the Conservative Party extra dangerous now. I'm not sure where I land on, say, those kind of perspectives, but I do want to make an appeal to my fellow Saskatchewan workers that this man does not represent working class people. If you're looking for someone who is not a quote unquote politician, normal politician, this man who has been in the parliament since 2004, since he was 25 years old, a career politician with no other previous job experience, is not who you want.
Yeah.
That's my appeal to fellow Saskatchewan workers. Somebody said that he has been in Parliament since 2004. Members of Parliament make $185,000 a year, and he has earned in that time over $3 million from his time in Parliament. In 2004, I made $30,000 working 60 hours a week at a labor job doing road surveying.
Yeah.
Me and him don't live in the same world. So I don't know. I don't think that... Yeah. Even if I had no other ethical disagreements with this person, I don't think that I would be able to see him as my representative.
Yeah, he kind of is everything the Conservatives claim Trudeau was, right?
Yeah, kind of.
Like they undermine sort of Trudeau's job, and which was this weird sort of pretending teacher isn't a real job.
Right.
They did this bizarre thing where, in spite of Trudeau having been a French teacher and a math teacher, they decided that he was a drama teacher, even though he wasn't. It was just this weird sort of, let's just make up shit about Trudeau and talk about how he has no real world experience and all of this. And to be fair, Trudeau also doesn't live in the same world as you or I.
No,
he obviously grew up with privilege.
Yeah.
I don't think anyone denies that, Trudeau, grew up in a very privileged world. But Trudeau literally has more real world experience than Poilievre does.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, but again, I think at this point, one of the things Poilievre does, and sort of to both of those points around the hot takes, is Poilievre strips the veneer from the Conservatives, and at this point, there's nothing but to say they are who we said they were, right?
Right.
The Conservatives have resoundingly embraced everything those of us on the left have been saying the Conservatives are.
Yeah. That's right.
So from a conservative perspective, going back to the comment from the top of the show, you do have a leader who was, aligned himself with the Freedom Convoy, has aligned himself with anti-queer movements, has aligned himself with anti-abortion movements. He has very clearly set himself up as a social conservative, and the type of social conservative who says, we're not going to open up things as a government, but then leave back doors open for private member bills and things like that. So
Yeah.
this isn't a leadership vote where, Jean Charest came in with, 45% and Polyev won on a third ballot or fourth ballot, or
Right.
It was 68%. Polyev had 68% of the vote. The party resoundingly said this is not a party that includes Jean Charest. He got 16. Charest got 16%. This is not a party that continues to include the progressive conservatives. The progressive conservatives have been gone for quite some time. But like I said, any veneer that this is a united conservative party, that this is the combination of the two parties that merged together and brought in Stephen Harper, is gone.
Yeah, no.
This is the Reform Party.
Yep.
This is the Reform Party without a lot of the sort of the grassroots populist parts.
That's right.
They got rid of Senate reform as a platform point. They got rid of public referendums. They got rid of a lot of the parts within the Reform Party that was anti-big business, but kept the social conservative elements.
They kept the big business corporate ties and also added social conservatism.
Yeah. So I would argue, instead of taking the progressive conservatives and the reform and keeping the best of both, they've taken the two and kept the worst of both. But again, that I'm not their target demographic. I don't think I ever could be.
I think it's hard for me to prognosticate about future elections or what have you, but I am concerned that there is an appeal to this that will grab on to people if they're disillusioned with the Liberal Party, because there are a lot of people disillusioned with the Liberal Party right now. I'm not a big fan of the Liberals either, but I'm an even less fan of the Conservatives. So
fair. And I don't know what more to say. I think as far as the whether or not they're irrelevant or whether or not we should be worried, I definitely think we should be worried. I think because I think anything can happen in politics, so he very well could win. And I think what it comes down to, I don't think he's going to change his stripes. I think he is who he's shown himself to be. And now begins the next, 2 to 3 years of him trying to convince the Toronto suburbs and Edmonton and Vancouver suburbs that he is palatable enough. I've talked about it before, right? Can people who are sort of center conservatives still vote for him and look their grandchildren in the eye?
It'd be a tough poll, I think.
But
some days
that's the next 2 years, right? The next 2 years is the pivot, and we'll see it. We'll see the pivot that Harper did and Scheer tried to do and was not so much successful with. And he will try and position himself as everything he claimed Charest was. He's going to try and position himself as a moderate. He's going to try and position himself, or maybe not. Maybe I'm completely wrong, and he'll continue to do photo ops with the convoy and see if he can get enough. If he can take the Trump approach, if he can
is appealing to the worst impulses of voters going to be the way to go? is Saskatchewan and Alberta voting for him going to be enough to propel him into the prime minister's seat? Like, I don't know. It's messed up. Anyway.
Yeah, no, it's yeah. I'm curious as to see where he goes. It's I think this is obviously not the end of this story.
Right. Yeah.
So we'll
Keep an
definitely
eye on it.
keep an eye on it, and I think again there's a strong Alberta and Saskatchewan element to it because that is very much his base. He's sort of the anti-Scheer, where Scheer was from Ottawa and like carpetbagged into Saskatchewan. Polyev, was lived in Alberta and then carpetbagged into Ottawa. So
right. Yeah.
One of these days, you are going to need to have like a federal leader who actually represents the riding they live in. That would be neat.
Right. Yeah, that would be neat. Well, moving on.
I think Polyev did this. Sorry, yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, because it was like Polyev, it's bizarre, right? Because he literally did the exact opposite that Scheer did. Because Scheer lived in Ontario his entire life and then literally just moved to Saskatchewan to run for office because it was an available seat, and like moved to Saskatchewan just barely in time to even qualify for running for the seat that he ran for. And then Polyev lived in Saskatchewan and Alberta his whole life.
Right.
And then moved to Ottawa just in time to like barely in time to qualify to run for a seat for Carleton. So they should have swapped.
Yep. That would have been better.
Actually run for the riding you actually live in. During our break?
Yeah, we'll cover. We'll talk a little bit about this Legacy Christian School and allegations of abuse, and there has been a few events that kind of rolled out at that time when it was first coming out. So where to start? This was on August 2nd. So this is quite a while ago. There's exorcisms, violent discipline, and other abuse alleged by former students of a private Sask Christian school. And these have so far been discussed a myriad of times in the media. There's been a lot of different takes on it. Like, I'm not going to get into the details of the actual abuse, but there's lots of talk now since this came out about the funding structure for private schools and the standards to which they are held and the ways that whether this school in particular should be allowed to operate. And I mean, we come out of like we both were part of the atheist community for a long time. So we were against religious schools in many ways beforehand. So I don't know how unbiased I can look at this. Like to me, I've been looking at stories of exorcisms in schools and to children and like people with mental illness for a decade, and it's always been clearly abusive and messed up, and it's awful. And no, this school shouldn't have any funding. Fuck them.
Yep. I agree. It's funny. This topic is the one of all the things I have talked about in a public forum over the years, of all of the somewhat controversial things I have said. This is the topic that by far has led to the most death threats that I have received.
Is that right?
It was probably about 10 years ago, maybe less. Was on Gormley talking about unifying school systems, and that was about the Catholic school system rather than private Christian school systems.
Right.
It was on Gormley talking about it and met with the NDP caucus and submitted a petition to Brad Wall and all of that, and it was a somewhat big deal. But yeah, that was like, say, nightmarish, but like there were a couple nights where I was literally like crying because of the abuse and the vitriol I got from it. I had to go onto my social media and remove any connections to family members because there were people who were messaging my sister and my spouse and
Wow. Yeah.
friends. And basically, yeah, it was getting to this point where Christians
Mm-hmm.
were raining down so much abuse on myself and my family because I had the audacity to suggest that we should have a single publicly funded school system that doesn't give preferential treatment to one religion over others. Um,
Yeah.
so I too have a hard time being somewhat unbiased on this. Um, at the end
Yeah.
of the day, though, a couple issues. But, one of them, though, as well, is like even aside from the religious aspect, I don't think non-religious private schools should be receiving government funding either.
Right.
Like
Yeah.
we we have public school. We know public schooling is one of the single most powerful forces for social equality in society.
Yeah.
Yeah, are if you are a passionate believer of a capitalist system and that capitalism helps create social mobility, and that social mobility is a good thing, public schools are one of the greatest forces that allow for that. They are one of the greatest forces that fuels the effectiveness of a capitalist system, because without public schooling, all of the people who you need to have competing don't have a entry point to enter the competition. Because if you believe that sort of the capitalist model is efficient and good and powerful because people compete, and that competition sort of elevates everyone. Um, I'm going to come up with a better idea to compete with the next guy over. I'm going to build a better mousetrap. If only one person knows how to build a mousetrap, capitalism doesn't work. If everyone knows how to build a mousetrap, then we're all trying to come up with ways of building a better mousetrap, and the system can work. Um, you need public education
If you keep fucking
in
with the
order to
education,
have. Yeah, if you don't have that, you cease to have capitalism.
yeah.
At least you cease to have capitalism as it was envisioned by those who believe capitalism is a good system.
Right.
Um, and it's you talk about the softening of the hard edges of capitalism. That's what public education can do. So if you take funding from public education and start giving it to private schools, you make everyone suffer, because then you also have issues with these private schools not having oversight, and it can
Mm-hmm.
lead to abuse. And you take away the other, like then you don't even not even worrying about that economic side, not even worrying about the piece that I was just talking about. You then also have the, at what point do we as a society say, no, we're not okay with children being abused?
Yeah. That's right.
And we've spent the last 2 years hearing conservatives throw the word grooming out anytime they hear someone is
Oh
gay.
yeah. Yeah.
And this, that, and the other thing, that all of a sudden, child abuse becomes this thing that they're going to bring up anytime they don't like anyone, whether abuse is happening or not. They find out a drag queen is doing story time at a library
Right. Yeah.
in public, not behind closed doors, with
Fully
library
clothed.
staff there, and
Yeah.
the only people who attend are children whose parents brought them to the event. That gets thrown out as grooming, whereas the whole time it was happening, many of the same people complaining about drag queen story time are themselves behind closed doors, violently and horrifically abusing children.
So if you defend legacy school or the system of abuse, then I'm afraid I don't take you seriously when you say that you care about children. How it is. I often, it's kind of an aside, but I often think of the grooming conversation as like kind of a psycho fantasy for violent right-wingers who want an excuse to do damage to queer and LGBT people. It's a nonsense, like it's just an excuse to have a violent fantasy about hurting somebody. They don't care about children.
They really do not.
In Saskatchewan, we now have someone who is doing advocacy for a pro-choice. So yeah, Sask Group plans billboards to counter anti-abortion messages lining province's highways. The large majority of our province is of the belief that abortion is healthcare, according to organizer. Megan Johnston is putting up pro-abortion billboards in around Saskatchewan. She has a GoFundMe that we will provide a link for in the show notes. I follow her on Instagram. That's very cool stuff. Because we do have like a huge pro-life movement in Saskatchewan too. They have a lot of funding. They've put billboards all over the province. So it'll be good to have some a counter to that.
Yeah, no, it's good. And she's right. Like if you look at polling, it's pretty consistent. Well, it's very consistent in Canada as a whole. Even in Saskatchewan, though, we are still a pro-choice province. Like the majority of the province, in their private beliefs, believes that the law should allow for abortion.
I'm gonna go out on an anecdotal limb here, and say that the majority of people that I have met in my life in Saskatchewan are not religious fundamentalists who care about the pro-life message or even about the school thing. Like many of them are non-religious in that they just don't do religion. Like they go to work, they do their life, they watch football on Sundays, and that's their life rather than going to church. There's still a very large church-going community in Saskatchewan too, but like even people who are believers, a lot of them in Saskatchewan are not even close to the fundamental view of things. So it doesn't entirely surprise me that the polling would be like in favor of choice.
Yeah. Well, if you look, I found a poll. I can add it to the show notes here as well. There was a poll done recently, just a couple months ago, by Insightrix, about Saskatchewan residents and their view of the United States overturning of Roe v. Wade. 77% of Saskatchewan residents opposed the U.S. overturning of Roe v. Wade. 66% strongly oppose, 11% somewhat oppose, 7% somewhat support, 12% strongly support, 3% prefer not to say. And
that's pretty overwhelming majority.
77%. Like that is overwhelming. And across every demographic, male, female, Saskatchewan, Regina, the north of the province, the south of the province, religious and non-religious. Amongst people in Saskatchewan who identify as religious, 69% opposed the overturning of Roe v. Wade and only 28% supported it.
Seems pretty cut and dry.
Yeah. If you look at abortion as a whole, so take Roe v. Wade out of it, people who believe that abortion should be legal under any or most circumstances, it is 75% of the province. 47% any circumstance whatsoever, 28% most circumstance. Only 3% of the province believe abortion should be illegal in all circumstances or legal in no circumstances. 3% believe it should never be legal.
So almost nobody.
That's Saskatchewan. Almost nobody. And yet, you still have, like, the one category I'm guessing that doesn't include is politicians.
Yes, that's right.
So.
Yeah. So it might be, if people will actually care about the choice and it might be good to like actually pay attention to what the politicians you are supporting are saying about this. And if they don't say anything, maybe ask them and make sure they don't dodge the question, because it can be informative. And if you believe in maintaining choice for people, maybe you should be watching what they're saying.
All right, I got somewhat sidetracked there.
Nope, that's perfect. That was awesome.
So, but yeah, the billboards are good. I think this is the one thing where I think there's an issue, or that where you run into problems. Of those who do oppose abortion, again, this is sort of anecdotal and observational, and I don't even know how you would get the data to this. It's somewhat granular. Amongst those who oppose abortion, they are more likely to make it a voting issue.
Mm-hmm.
So of that 77% of the province who supports the right to abortion, how many of those would let it influence the party they vote for? Based on the number of people in this province who vote for the Sask party, it can't be a lot.
Yeah.
Whereas amongst the 25% or the 20% who oppose abortion, I think that is a swing issue for them.
Yeah,
and I think that holds true.
Yeah.
I think that holds true across the political spectrum, because this isn't a uniquely Canadian thing either. In the U.S., in spite of how it may appear, when you look at opinion polling, it's
2/3 of Americans,
yeah,
at least, support abortion rights or choice. So on some level. So,
but again, it just comes down to how many of them are willing to let it change who they vote for.
And I don't know how about in the States. Like, it's such a prevalent issue there. So you would think people would know their stance of their politician, right? But here, I wonder if people just take it for granted that this is a thing that is accepted. We don't talk about it. So therefore, it's not something that I vote on. But if it was more publicly aware, maybe they would more.
But I think one of the things, it's going full circle again to the top of the show, humans are really bad at acute versus chronic issues, right?
Yeah, true.
We don't have an acute issue with abortion rights in Saskatchewan. We don't have a overturning of Roe v. Wade, but we certainly have a chronic one where access has been slowly strangled over the last 15 years, where less and less places to get abortions, where you have people in some parts of this province needing to travel hours upon hours to get to a facility where they can get one performed, where it's legal at any point but not actually accessible after a certain number of weeks. So we have this thing in Canada where we don't necessarily have the big fights that they have in the US, but we just have conservatives slowly but surely taking people's rights away, but don't make a big deal about it. They don't grandstand about it like they do in the US. But honestly, I don't know what's worse, because in the US, they've spent 20 years talking, or 30 years or 40 years at this point, talking about how they're going to repeal Roe v. Wade, but never actually doing it until recently. Yeah. In Canada, our conservative politicians don't talk about it. They say, oh, no, that's settled law, or
they just slowly
a Stephen Harper government will not open this issue, while behind the scenes, just slowly but surely reducing access and funding anti-abortion groups overseas, and shifting the narrative subtly and slowly as part of policy as opposed to as part of law.
Yeah.
Anyways, no. There's my. You said you had a good story and a positive story, and I kind of shifted it depressing.
Hey, that's the world we live in.
At the end of the day, abortion is healthcare.
Yes. Yeah. And should be free and legal. So for the last 10 minutes.
Affordability checks. I think we take a minute or two to talk about. I don't know if that needs to be a touch on much, but I think it's an interesting story. I think it's what I find fascinating about it is my entire life, I keep getting told by conservative governments that left-wing governments are going to try to bribe voters with their own money.
Right.
Um, I don't necessarily think it's a bad thing. I think right now, getting money back into people's pockets so that people can spend, like, it's a
Yeah,
good
that's
thing.
good. Yeah, that's good.
Um,
It's good for the
yeah,
economy and whatnot. Um,
yeah,
I see a $1 billion surplus, and I'm always struck by the idea, like, why isn't that money allocated to something? This, they say, was a surplus because of revenues from energy or oil commodities. But I don't know. Education was underfunded quite a bit this year. Like,
well, and healthcare and education get hit when energy prices were low,
yeah,
and now that
they
energy
don't
prices are
get
going back up. Huh?
that money needs to go
Um,
back in there.
but
Yeah. Like I said, the day that this came out, I said on Twitter, like I said, like, a government that is has $1 billion surplus is a government that underspent on services by $1 billion. It seems pretty plain to me.
if it's a one time, like, I guess that's where the
Yeah,
issue comes
yeah,
in, is if it's a one time and you don't, then it's not a funded expense. But
right.
we've depleted our rainy day fund. If nothing else,
Plug this in
even
there.
if you didn't put it back into healthcare and education, at the very least, I could see the rainy day fund. The other argument, though, of course, being we need to put an injection in the economy right now. People are hurting, and this
Yeah,
is something you can do to try and get some spending. I don't know. It was a weird decision all around. I'm not 100% sure if it was the right one or not, but
I was kind of wondering because my partner is only a permanent resident and not a quote unquote citizen. Like, I was curious how that would work, but it appears that anyone who paid taxes in the previous year will get the check, uh, like, from the Saskatchewan government. So if you have two tax paying people in your home, you'll get $1,000. That's nice. So we kind of talked about this one story. We talked about how the University of Saskatchewan was supposed to have a plan so that they could make sure that there wasn't people faking Indigenous status so that they could get into jobs meant for Indigenous people. And it seems that they're going to be using status cards and the Métis registry. So, unfortunately, this leaves a lot of people out. There's been a lot of flaws pointed out by various Indigenous peoples that I've seen, read about. But yeah, this is the plan. They're going to use. I don't know how much. They said they were going to consult with Indigenous communities and whatnot. Yes, Mark Ackland,
yeah,
tribal chief of the Saskatoon Tribal Council, says the U of S is on the right track. So I don't know.
I think this is one
Yeah,
of those ones where
this
I
is
think we need
the
to
way to
talk about
go.
it. Sorry, we need to let people know that it's happening. We talk about
Yeah,
major events in the news. Very much out of my lane. Again, I think um, it's this needs to be decided by the Indigenous community, and hopefully the um, university listens. The issue you run into is the Indigenous community is not a monolith, right? It's not
yeah,
that everyone agrees within the community as to how that works. But
yeah. Which is where you're going to get various criticisms and people in favor of this policy. But we're running up on our hour now, so I guess we'll do our closing. If you want to check out the show, you can do that at anchor.fm/frommanypeoples. Our Twitter is at skpoliticspod. It's been very quiet lately. I'm usually active on my other Twitter. um, Our
I
Facebook
went
page
back
is...
onto Twitter for all of like 5 minutes over the last couple of months and then left after about 6 minutes. So
That was enough for you.
yeah, Twitter's not my social media jam.
Yeah, I don't blame you. Facebook.com/FromManyPeoplesStrengthPod. I have a new website, so this is no longer valid. I'll have to get this changed. The new website is skepticalleftist.com.
Okay. Got rid of the pod and the WordPress.
That's right.
Okay. Shorter is better. I like it.
Shorter is better. That's right. And check it out, skepticalleftist.com. It's very nice. I did a lot of work on it.
Okay.
Frommanypeoples@gmail.com is our email. And if you would like to send us $1 or $2, you can do that by going to buymeacoffee.com/frommanypeoples. And with that, thank you, David, for joining me.
Thank you, as always, for all the work you do, Cory. And see you in a couple weeks.
You bet.
Take care.